When I was 11, my mother bought me a telescope from a novelty store. It was old, about 10 or so years maybe, slightly rusted from time, but never used. The next night, I went out to a small field and used it to gaze into the sky. The moment the reflected lights of the planets shined into my eyes was the moment I knew what I wanted to do. Our twin sister Venus, so alike and yet more different than we could have ever imagined. Jupiter, the titanic guardian of the inner planets, morphing the system around it. Saturn, with her beautiful and luscious rings that envelop her sky. Mercury, a small and rapid rock that was closer to the light than anyone on Earth could withstand. And most of all, Mars, the red planet, a fearsome war-born neighbor. And what would be the next step on humanity's path to the stars? I knew with just one look that I wanted to help guide us on that path. I've been working at NASA for over 15 years now, and in that time, I've seen dozens of proposals for a manned landing on Mars. Hundreds of people spent weeks at a time discussing the engineering process behind designing a craft capable of carrying out the task of transporting mankind back and forth between the two planets. Millions of dollars poured into projects that never came to light. And for the longest time, the problem was that we simply couldn't feasibly land someone on the planet and then help them return home safely. In part, that was one of the reasons we launched the Mars exploration rovers. If you don't know, I'll go over it briefly. The MR was a mission that involved launching 2 rovers to explore the surface of Mars, and the 2 were named Spirit and Opportunity. They would be the successors to the prior Sojourner rover. The data collected thanks to the MER is invaluable, and at any other time I'd love to divulge them. They were only planned to last 90 days, but the guys back in engineering seriously put in some effort. They lasted longer than they should have after arriving in early 2004. For most of the mission, it wasn't too special. We gathered as much data as we could, had the rovers explore their surroundings, mine up rocks sometimes. Nothing too special to ride home about unless you're really interested in Martian minerals. Officially, Spirit's mission ended after getting stuck in a sand pit in 2009, losing all power the year later, and the mission declared complete after another year. This is partially true. Spirit really did lose her power after she got stuck. It's partially our fault. She had fallen into a slight dip in the ground, and the risk of falling deeper was huge. We assumed it was a sand pit and acted like we always had, but alas, it wasn't. Upon instructing her to escape, Spirit lost her footing, falling into a deep hole. Her signal strength was heavily weakened by her fall, and the sands of Mars were destined to bury the rover alive. I spent most of the time with Spirit after she fell in. It's strange, yes, but I felt, and still feel, an attachment to the rovers. Seeing her trapped in the dunes of Mars was like watching my daughter trip into a well. Still, she remained operational for nearly 2 months, even if the data she was sending quickly became the same tedious graphics and images that were hampered by time. Most of our crew shifted focus to Opportunity, but I stayed behind with Spirit. The closer she got to the end of her lifespan, the longer we had to wait between responses. The last time we heard from her officially was in late March. We tried for months to communicate, partially at my insistence. Spirit was like my child. I wouldn't let her go so easily. My persistence paid off in the end. In late December, Spirit responded to a data request. From what I could tell, she had somehow fallen even deeper, finding a cave. By some miracle, she remained upright, allowing us to maneuver her through the cavern. When we requested an image, she obliged, and 6 minutes later, the delay between receiving orders and sending data thanks to the distance, it arrived, and what we saw was baffling, to say the least. It was a perfectly vertical wall, with strange unknown symbols carved into its surface. There are many possible explanations for this, so nobody on the crew jumped to an extraterrestrial as the cause. We ordered Spirit to get closer and take another photo. It never arrived. Spirit stopped responding once again, likely due to her dying batteries. I thought that was it for her. The image was classified to keep the public from freaking out, at least until we determined an explanation behind the sigils in the wall. Shortly after that, Spirit's mission was declared complete. And then, out of the blue, she sent an image. This was puzzling. It was the only thing she had sent, despite the hundreds of requests for other forms of data and status updates after the last picture. My guess is that Spirit had actually received her previous order for a photograph, but for whatever reason, was unable to send it back until that point. Due to the circumstances, barely anyone was made aware of the incident. It was just me and a few others who examined the picture. It was pitch black. You couldn't make out anything even if you tried. That is, until someone suggested brightening it. It was still near total darkness, but in the corner, there were two very distinct red dots, aimed directly at the camera. We couldn't shake how much they looked like eyes. Apart from that, the cavern was slightly visible, appearing to be a vastly different location than we had last seen. Spirit must have moved significantly, but where to, and more importantly, how, is something I'm still not entirely sure of. Most of the attention was drawn to the red glowing dots. This wasn't necessarily proof of anything. There are several possible answers for what they could be. The camera might have detected large pieces of dust, and due to the quality loss of brightening, it appeared much rounder than it really was. It could be a reflection of the rover's lights on the cave wall. That's the answer we settled on, but I knew something was off. I think my colleagues did too. That was the last we've received from Spirit. We stopped trying to communicate with her. We had more important things to put our focus on, namely the remaining rover, Opportunity, and Curiosity, who was to be launched in November. I've always considered Opportunity and Spirit to be twins, brother and sister with the shared purpose of propelling humanity into the future, taking after their eldest brother Sojourner. I was still studying when Sojourner was active, but I can try and dig around for information on him sometime later. I've heard he has some interesting findings, but I'm getting off track. Opportunity is much the star of the MER. He lasted for over 15 years on the harsh Martian landscape, powering through dust, rock, and time with the passionate hearts of 7 billion people behind him. Oppie, as he came to be called, was, for a few months, the only active rover until Curiosity's arrival in 2012. Although not as focused on the subject of life as his younger sibling, he still provided invaluable information. I've never been more proud of a little rover in my life than I was of this little guy. Without his twin, Oppie had to function alone, even if only for a short period. Still, I didn't want him to feel alone without Spirit. I'd dedicate her memory to him. Oppie's mission officially came to a halt 2 years ago. A severe dust storm had sent him into hibernation, a sleep from which he would never awake. Last February, we stopped trying to awaken him and bid farewell to Opportunity. That's the official story, and unlike Spirit, it's much further from the truth, and there's a damn good reason for keeping it secret. Although he was supposed to be in hibernation during the storm, Oppie would occasionally send back information about odd, seemingly volcanic rocks. This was obviously startling, and not just because the rover was somehow operating during hibernation. Where he was stationed, Oppie wasn't in range of any volcanic fixtures. The only way he could be sending this data was if he somehow reactivated during the storm, and if a group of volcanic rocks just so happened to have been pushed by the winds close enough for him to reach. Needless to say, the chances of that occurring are slim to none. Knowing the media panic that'd ensue from the implications, all of this was quickly classified. Opportunity would, officially, be declared as inoperative and would remain that way until further notice. Unofficially, research continued. The same team that worked with Spirit after she fell into that cave was assembled to investigate this mystery, myself included. Oppie would still carry out the tasks instructed of him, and as such, an image was requested. In response, he sent back an almost natural photo of the Martian landscape. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, except for the rocks. Lying on the ground next to his wheels were 6 perfectly cut hexagonal prisms made out of what looked to be obsidian. Lowering the camera and taking another photo, markings were discovered on the objects. Unnervingly, they were all facing the screen, and perfectly aligned at that. The markings on the objects were strange, to say the least. They resembled hieroglyphics in a way, yet they remained distinctly different. What felt especially eerie was that they resembled the sigils Spirit had found years prior. Scanning them gave us the exact same data Oppie was sending us during the storm. Normally, in a scientific situation, we try to take things logically. The reason we don't accept aliens did it as a solution to every mystery we encounter in space is that in science, our goal is to find a natural explanation behind all observed phenomena. And in all situations we find ourselves in, there is one. Our goal is to find it. There was nothing explainable nor natural about this. Still, assuming we had just discovered alien life, they should have left traces of something when interacting with objects. That would have been picked up by Oppie during his scans. If Opportunity was the one who placed the objects, that also doesn't make sense. The rocks weren't there before the storm, and the wheels are much too slow for Oppie to have somehow found them and returned to his location. Besides that, why would he behave in this way? He had to have been instructed to do this by something we were somehow unable to detect, something that came during the storm. After a short debate, we instructed Oppie to pick up each prism and photograph it individually in hopes of possibly understanding what they were supposed to be. Multiple theories started up in the control room, quickly diverting attention. Assuming it was genuinely alien life, it is way too deliberate to have been an accident. Whatever alien life did, this would be at least moderately intelligent. Maybe it was trying to greet us. But if that's the case, why like this? If it's aware we're watching, then why doesn't it show itself? The debates continued as Opportunity sent back photographs. Taking a break from the conversation, I briefly looked at the screen and immediately froze. The most recent image was of the second prism. Almost nothing unusual about that. But in the very far distance of the screen stood something. It was almost impossible to see behind all of the dust. I couldn't make out much of anything regarding the figure's appearance. I chalked it up to maybe being one of the other prisms, and the angle had made it appear further away. The third image disproved that. The figure was visibly closer this time, but still difficult to make out. From where it was shot, it was obvious whatever I was looking at was humanoid. It was rather short, about the size of a teenager. I took a moment, then waited for the fourth image. When it arrived, I nearly took a step back. At that point, it was clear that whatever this was, it had to be some sort of creature, and it was making its way toward Oppie. They were much easier to see, judging by the sudden halt and chatter around me. They were hunched over, standing on jagged and clawed feet. A glimmer of red could be seen glaring at the camera, the same crimson shade captured by Spirit in her last photograph. Equally red teeth could be seen in the beast's maddened grin, lined around a long snout. It had several large protrusions emerging from the back of its head, almost like tentacles in the form of hair. Hanging above its head were two very long tails. Seemingly longer than the creature was tall, sharp thorns covering them like razor wire. I wasn't afraid of its appearance. I was afraid that whatever this thing was, it was walking on the surface of Mars with apparently no issue. I was afraid of the malice in its eyes. I can't describe what it felt like. They pierced down into my soul, racking my heart with fear until it pounded uncontrollably, as if it was ready to burst from its cage. It didn't feel like it was looking at the rover, nor the camera. It felt like it was looking at us. It couldn't be. It couldn't know. Even if it was aware the rover could see, it couldn't possibly know what Oppie's purpose is, and it certainly couldn't predict when the images are taken. The data transmission takes 6 minutes total, from when the order is sent to when it is received, and my heart stopped. The images were 3 minutes old. We were looking at the past. The creature was already at the rover. Before I could even react to the realization, the screen flickered to what should have shown the fifth prism. Instead, the camera was tilted over to face the creature, whose claws were wrapped around Oppie's body. Animosity filled its scornful gaze. The crimson red that outlined its eyes and teeth took on a new hue, the same as the red rocks of Mars. From the height of the photo, the creature must have been lifting Oppie. The sixth image was never received. Opportunity never responded to any of our communication attempts after it sent that picture. As far as anyone here knows, the creature destroyed the rover, leaving Curiosity alone on the barren surface. Obviously, it was very quickly decided that none of this would become public. Internally, we were a mess afterwards. It was undeniable proof of alien life, which we had searched so long to find. And yet, while nobody could say why, it was more unnerving than exciting. We expected microbes, not an animal, let alone an intelligent one. That's what gets to me the most. The way its eyes locked into mine. There's nothing I can say that could possibly describe the feeling of abject hatred in that beast's eyes. That wasn't instinct, it was malice. It hated humanity, and it hated Earth. And it wanted us to know that. Despite how horrifying the ordeal felt, I kept my composure as best I could and assisted in the cover-up. I don't think I abandoned my morals, nor do I think that NASA did the wrong thing by hiding this. Hell, even now, I don't know if I'm doing the right thing by telling you all. The discovery of life on another planet should be one of excitement, not dread. That's what I wanted people to feel when we made the announcement. And so, the true fate of opportunity remained in the shadows. I know a few people who tried to go public about it, posting online, telling friends and family. Nobody believed them, and NASA knew that. No, they're not dead in a ditch somewhere. There's not a lot of people with the education and expertise necessitated for our means, and besides, it'd be more suspicious if they did end up in a ditch. They did get one hell of a pay cut though, that's for sure. So, why am I finally telling you all about this? Sure, there's no risk to my life, and hey, they can cut my pay in half and I'll still be making more than the average family. But I supported them, helped them cover this, and I even sympathize with their reasoning. Well, it's because of what I saw last week. Due to the quarantine, I've been spending all of my time here at base, monitoring Curiosity's search. Everything was going well, nothing out of the ordinary until that Saturday. It was almost midnight when I noticed it. There it was, in the most recent photograph, just sitting there, tauntingly. 6 hexagonal prisms, each turned towards Curiosity. The creature I had seen, that we had all seen, and chose to deny. It sat atop a large rock, glaring into the camera with a tilted head. Its eyes and muzzle burrowed into a mocking expression. I could almost hear it sneer. Most everyone else was asleep or had left, so the decisions came down to me. I just stood there, dumbfounded. This couldn't be the same creature. It just couldn't be. Curiosity is thousands of kilometers from opportunity. How could it have traveled that distance on foot? I knew by all logic it had to be a different member of the same species, but something in its eyes, the purely crimson dots, it told a different story. They were the same. I saw them through Spirit's eyes. I saw them through Oppie's. Hesitating and shaking, I sent a photo request and waited the 6 long minutes for a response. I was greeted by the sight of the creature, grinning maniacally. It was gesturing to the ground beneath its feet. Standing there were the prisms, the clearest shot of all 6 at once, the sigils inscribed on their faces as visible as the hatred in the beast's soul. I've still yet to decode what they mean. I requested one more image on the off chance that Curiosity was spared destruction. What I saw is why I've finally broken my vow of secrecy. It's why I'm telling you all this. Hell, it's why I might spill everything I can find. Knowing this thing existed on the red planet, how intelligent it was, and how scornful of man it seemed to be. That alone horrified me to want to forget the beast. It had crawled from the depths of insanity, the core of the planet of war itself. One single soldier, capable of tearing through the strongest alloys we could construct. Just one. And in the last photo, there were thousands. If only I knew what kind of fucked up rabbit hole I was crawling into when I first saw those things on Mars. Well, when you enter this kind of work, you acknowledge that you're not getting out of it. You don't just leave the world of astronomy after discovering all its wonders. No, when you enter that world, you become a part of it, a piece of an ever-growing puzzle. Astronomy is a science that becomes your kin. I've seen things I wish I hadn't, but I can't quit my quest to understand, to discover all that the universe has to offer. When I became an astronomer, when I accepted this position 17 years ago, I understood that it was something I would hold to for the rest of my life. Now that it's led me to what it has, there really is no turning back. Right from the get-go, what I thought was the discovery of extraterrestrial life on another planet was merely another encounter with it. The earliest I can trace the first sighting of the creatures, I'll refer to them as Martians for simplicity and due to recommendations, dates back to 1971. Unfortunately, that was in a landing by the Soviets, and trying to sift through their files has led me nowhere so far. I'm left in the dark when it comes to that, apart from the knowledge that the Soviets were aware of life on Mars decades before Spirit and Opportunity made history. How they did, I'll get into that. But for now I will keep trying to uncover what I can. Unfortunately, the collapse of the Soviet Union makes this monumentally more difficult. Now, onto what we at NASA have found. Despite what I thought, Sojourner had no encounters with the Martians. Rather, Our first meeting was with the Mars Surveyor program in 1998. NASA launched 2 spacecraft that year, an orbiter and a lander. The official story is that the Mars Polar Lander lost contact upon descent, and the Mars Climate Orbiter crashed into the planet due to an error in which the craft utilized imperial seconds. As you can expect by now, this is far from the truth. Lander continued communications for at least 17 hours, and although most records are scrubbed, I found a mostly uncensored report. I'm not sure who recorded it. I've never seen them before, but it contains the bulk of information on Lander. Here's the transcript. This is going on record. The Mars Surveyor program has encountered unexpected interference. Touchdown occurred at roughly 2012 UTC on December 3rd. Lander failed to establish communications for 34 minutes before successful interactions occurred. Imager showed location to be vastly different than anticipated. Lander made contact with a deep, thin crater that led into a cavern. Probes failed to respond. No data was collected via Lander. Object instead lifted by unseen force. Lander ceases communication for the next 23 minutes. Upon return, an image of a shrine was sent. Shrine appeared ritualistic in nature and was carved out of an unknown material, likely obsidian. The video pauses then to show the photo. The molded material and the sigils inscribed into it reminded me all too well. A thick layer of some strange, viscous yellow liquid was smeared on the shrine. I couldn't see any Martians in the frame, but I knew they were there. Second photo shows an unidentified figure, standing at approximately 312 centimeters tall, maintaining a slender frame. Analysis from the biological department has concluded that the figure is an animal of reptilian descent. There it is. There it fucking is. Staring right at the camera, grinning with sadistic glee. The next 2 frames are simply clearer shots of both the Martian and the shrine. Whatever kind of fucked up religion they had, they were dedicated to it. Pieces of metal, presumably from prior landers, were used as decoration. Another similar figure appears, measuring slightly shorter at 306 centimeters. The 2 figures kneel in front of the shrine. Communication ceases for 49 minutes. When it resumes, Lander has been moved back, giving it a clear view. Yet another figure is standing at the altar with a lowered head. Figure turns to face the camera. This one was odd. Markings were present along the creature's scales, for what purpose we'll get into later. The next few frames are simply more shots of this specific individual. Strangely, there's no malice in this one, merely a solemn gaze into the lens. It's the first Martian that didn't give me a death glare. 4 other figures enter the frame. The middle figure, hereby designated as the tribute, gets on top of the altar and lays down on its back. The 4 others each take 1 limb from the tribute and hold it in place before restraining the tribute to the shrine. Tribute shows signs of hesitation. This frame appears to show them communicating with the others. The 4 figures exit the scene, leaving tribute alone. 9 minutes pass before a figure enters the frame and stares at the camera. I won't lie. I almost stopped there. Those eyes. I know them. Spirit knows them. Oppie knows them. It was as if this fucking thing was following me. But this was the past, long before Spirit made contact. My heart started racing faster after seeing it, but I pressed on. The voiceover ends, leaving just the photos streaming like video. Tribute seemed agitated, almost distressed even, as the larger creature stepped back, gaze fixated on the camera. With its 2 hands, it places them onto Tribute's body, tracing the markings with its claws. With a sickening grin, its claws pierce down into Tribute's scales, tearing apart their flesh. There's no audio attached, but Tribute's expression changed from one of fear and desperation to one of agony. I won't go into detail here for the sake of your sanity, but Tribute was swiftly eviscerated with ruthless efficiency, splattering the shrine with yellow blood. They remained alive for a long while, but eventually succumbed to their wounds. The cuts were drawn along the symbols of their body. When the deed was done, the monster rose from the shrine, eyes having never left the cameras. Then, with one quick strike, it tore Lander apart, ending the signal. The rest of the report talks about the implications and the definitive cover-up that would need to happen. My first time watching, I was speechless. If these things were willing to slaughter their own so savagely, that doesn't bode well for future interactions. After that, I didn't know where to look. The Soviets knew something. They did something. But Lander's fate gave no insight into what exactly they did. I had to look elsewhere, and my search eventually led to something entirely new. A completely off-the-records mission. one that was never revealed to the public, let alone what she had found. It was a rover, crafted to follow up on Lander's findings, and this lone adventurer went unnamed. I've decided to name her Journey. It just felt wrong for any rover to go as just a statistic. Journey was secretly launched on January 29, 2000. Her destination was the same as Lander's. Her cameras were much more equipped. They were capable of sending an actual live feed rather than static images. She made touchdown in mid-February, quickly moving to where Lander had fallen. There's no report on this one, only video files and pictures. For the first 3 days, she just travels, finally finding the shrine late the third night. The blood was dried out by now, scarcely any evidence of the slaughter before. Journey continued to explore the shrine, finding smaller altars and very familiar obsidian rocks. For a large chunk of the footage, no life is seen. Eventually, Journey makes her way down a small and cramped corridor before reaching an expansive open room. Hanging from the rocky ceilings sat dozens of bioluminescent flora, each glowing shades of blue, some dimmer than others. The soil beneath was coated with a dim red grass. Journey paused for a moment, as if she was taking in the view. Small vines stuck out from the grass with bulbous fruits attached. Carefully, she crept towards one, reaching out and taking a fruit to examine. It had an almost ocean blue color and was shaped like a cross between a pear and a banana. Journey didn't have the dexterity to peel back the skin, not without damaging the fruit, I assume, so she gently placed it onto the ground. Following another passageway, she entered a slightly smaller room that shared many traits with the prior. Instead of the pear-like fruit, this room seemed reserved for the cultivation of a large watermelon-like fruit, differed only by its mango mixture of colors. This room was a dead end, so Journey turned around, back the way she came. The next few rooms are all of the same caliber, a room containing a single type of fruit. It wasn't until Journey encountered a massive underground ravine that things changed. The small opening gave way to an expansive chasm, walls adorned with balconies and doorways all the way to the top. It was undeniable, an underground Martian village. Journey stood for a moment, gawking at the sight as I assume her handlers were too, simply moving the camera to view all she could. Journey's field of view caught several lingering creatures, the brightest and clearest view I've ever had of them. One particular Martian was at work with the pieces of Lander, trying to mend it with another unidentified spacecraft. My eyes lit up as Journey slowly approached, giving a clearer view of the heavily faded flag of the USSR. The Soviets had definitely been here before, but as expected, their craft fell victim to the hostile life. Despite the danger presented, Journey pushed forward until you could see the glimmer of the Martian's eyes. Like tribute, this one, I'll call him Mechanic, was contrary to the typical malicious glare of his kin. Rather, it was one of childlike curiosity, poking and pulling at the metal. When Mechanic finally noticed Journey, they simply sat as the rover approached, arm extended. Mechanic pressed both of their tails against the rover in what I assume is a greeting, before turning their attention back. Fascinatingly enough, most of the Martians that interacted with Journey did so positively. It's surreal seeing them act so jovial to something they gleefully destroyed. Venturing further into the village, the rover found a small, icy blue pond. A quick analysis confirmed it was water, incredibly pure water at that. Lush red grass encircled the pond. Mechanic approached from behind, quickly getting onto their stomach to stare at Journey. Their eyes locked as much as one can stare at a camera. The wonder in their eyes reminds me of myself, years prior, the excitement, the drive to want to know more. It almost made me forget about what I had seen them do. It probably would have, if not for what happened next. Mechanic's attention was drawn away suddenly by a loud sound perhaps, and Journey followed suit 6 minutes later. By then, most of the Martians had left, only a few stragglers sticking around and even fewer going down a wide path. Journey gave chase, slowly but surely. The path led her to a large room reminiscent of the shrine, except perhaps more refined and focused. Hundreds of the Martians were gathered around, staring at the altar where those oh-so-familiar eyes were situated. Through the crowd, I could spot Mechanic, presumably talking to who by now I assume is their leader. After, their leader dashes towards the entrance, finding Journey before grinning. The defenseless rover was lifted and carried to the altar, and placed to the side to observe. They wanted us to see this. Mechanic tried to leave, but was stopped by leader, who pulled them back, forcing them onto the altar. I knew what would happen next, and I didn't want to see it. I looked away with a held breath, praying that I would be wrong. But I was all too right. When I glanced back a minute later, his corpse was unrecognizable, mutilated beyond recognition. It was barbaric. How could a society so intelligent perform such horrific acts? Journey peeked at the cheering crowd, sending a pit in my stomach. Not all were cheering, but they were definitely a minority. The crowd of Martians enjoyed the show. Somehow Mechanic was still alive, his eyes gazing into Journey's, beggingly. The rover stood still, and fury filled my veins. Her operators were letting this happen. With one final plunge of Leader's yellow blood-soaked claws, Mechanic's life faded. I was hoping that would be the end of it. It wasn't. As Leader unceremoniously tossed the body aside, 3 figures walked towards the altar, each lending their strength to carrying a body of their own. Reaching the end of the hall, they were sprawled out, and my horror rose tenfold. They weren't bodies. They were people. Living, breathing people, men on Mars. And they were terrified. The 2 males were chained to the altar while the blonde woman was dragged to Journey, where she was hidden off camera. I screamed at the rover to move, to help, to do something other than stand and watch. But her operators gave her no aid to assist. Journey was as powerless as these men. The crowd seemed to go insane, beyond ecstatic at the prospect of a ritualistic slaughter. The man on the right, with brown hair, stared defiantly at Leader, bravely facing his death with dignity. The quality of the camera was good enough to even let me see him spit at his killer mockingly. Judging purely by appearance, he was Russian. The Soviets had been to Mars. They even landed on it. I can see why they didn't say. The Russians' taunting was short-lived. Leader jabbed its claws into his abdomen with what must have produced a sickening crack. I grimaced at the sight, but pressed on. The man never screamed as far as I could tell. He seemed to be laughing in the face of death. I so wished there was audio to know what he had been saying. Even as Leader furiously tore into his chest, the man stayed steadfast until he could laugh no more, a corpse on the slab. The man beside him seemed much younger and significantly less composed. Terror was visible on his face as Leader prepared to deliver onto him the same fate. His eyes made contact with Journey, her lenses echoing the apathetic stance of her operators. The second man had no time to beg. Leader cracked open his chest, bursting it open like a newborn xenomorph would hatch from its host. The man thrashed, kicked, screamed, cried. It made no difference. Leader didn't care, and neither did the operators. Journey sat there, forced to watch along with the woman. The man's torment didn't last long. Mercifully, he died quick. Leader stepped back, hunching over with its head pointed up. It unhinged its jaws in what I can only imagine was an unholy roar of sadistic pride. The crowd was pleased to say the least. Leader went on to drag out the woman, who had tears in her eyes, forcing her to stare at the camera. She shook her head, reluctant of something, but her resistance was put to an end with Leader's razor-bladed tail slicing across her back. She fell over, blood pouring out her back, before picking herself up, emotion draining from her face. She says something, her body trembling, before the feed finally cuts out. Journey's end. The first time I saw that, I was distressed. I was scared. I was enraged. I didn't even try to think about what she had said. The next day I watched it again, preparing to transcribe it. It was only then my interest took note. Leader wanted her to say something. It was most definitely in Russian, a language I'm not fluent in, let alone reading lips alone to understand. I've given it my best shot, and, well, there's no question about it. I have to find out what the Soviets found. I have to find out what they did. I'm too deep into this now, and hell, I probably know enough to where I might actually be in real danger now, especially with all I'm revealing. But the world needs to know. You have to know what she said.
This is all our fault.
My grandfather passed away in 2007. He was 70 years old exactly. He was old enough to have seen the moon landing live, all the way back in 1969. Most everyone who saw that footage was enamored by the prospect that we as a species had made it to Luna, to a place our ancestors thought too far from our reach. Even now, it fills people with a sense of wonder and awe for the solution of the impossible. My grandfather was the only man I knew who felt otherwise. A gut feeling told him that something terrible is out there in the stars, and that by landing on the moon, we opened a door to madness. After everything that's happened so far, I'm inclined to believe him. That insanity, of course, wasn't on the moon, but rather our dearest neighbor, Mars, the Roman god of war. At times, I think how fitting that name has become over time. I've dug in as far as I can for answers. Just the opportunity to know a little bit more is all I seeked, and I've found what I was looking for. Dear Lord, do I regret it, however. Before I get into that, let me catch you up on things as well as answer a few questions and comments I've received. A month ago, one of our rovers, Curiosity, encountered alien life on Mars. She is the third to do so that I knew of after Spirit and Opportunity, all of which I was here to witness for myself. Just recently, I've discovered that the Soviets have not only landed spacecraft on Mars, but succeeded in doing what NASA has not, putting man on Mars. Much to my dismay, the Soviets did a damn good job at covering up their landings, so much so that almost all of the records are lost or destroyed, almost all of them. A scarce few remain, and with a bit of digging and bribery, I've gotten a look at them. Most of it is heavily redacted, apart from the centerpiece, what I was definitely happy to find. The live feed recording of the Soviets' Martian landing from 1989, audio and all. I can't upload the video as it will almost definitely attract attention. That's why I haven't uploaded anything beyond my posts, but I certainly can transcribe this for you. The feed starts from the cone of the landing craft as it descends onto the Martian landscape. For a few minutes, nothing of note happens, until the door unseals and slowly opens. Out steps a man who cuts the feed, swapping it to show video and audio from his helmet, exclaiming in Russian. I don't know what exactly he said. He faces the rather impressively large pod, from which the female, Stella Zelina, if records are correct, from Journey's footage exits. She is visibly much younger, 10 years younger in fact. My stomach churns thinking about how long she had been held captive there. The two begin a short exchange.
Touchdown?
Yes, we did it. Can you hear us, Commander? We're on the surface.
The man replies with beaming enthusiasm. The woman steps aside to give room for the rest of the crew to come out. It's a rather large crew of 7 people. 2 men who I recognized from Journey's footage are among them. Thanks to documents, I know that their names are Maxim Durov and Yakov Selner. The 6 crew members gathered in a line as the camera operator showed them off one by one, admiring the dedication and heroism of his crew.
Yakov, you seeing this? I can't believe it.
One cosmonaut, Sergei Chernov, says. Yakov, the crying man from the previous video, steps out of formation and looks around in awe. He's joined by 2 others.
We're heroes, the pride and joy of millions. How could I believe it?
Yakov answers. The second woman, documents name her as Natia Latova, re-enters the capsule along with Maxim and a man named by documents as Luchak Turbin. That leaves Damian Poltanov as the cameraman. The footage is mostly uneventful for the first 30 minutes or so, mostly the crew discussing their excitement and pride for the successful landing while they set up equipment and gather samples. Yakov takes a Soviet flag from the craft and ventures with Sergei to find a place to plant it.
Careful and be back in 10, no less.
Damian orders. Yakov chuckles and keeps walking. I can almost feel Damian roll his eyes. He steps into the pod and the next 10 minutes are simply just waiting. Of course, neither Yakov nor Sergei returned.
Yakov, what's the holdup?
Luchak asks impatiently. No response.
Yakov, Sergei.
Nothing but silence.
Come in, Yakov.
This is Sergei. Can you read me?
Sergei's voice is dumbstruck, contrasting how tough it sounds otherwise.
We found a structure.
Luchak turns to look at Damian in confusion. Natia has no answers either, if she even noticed.
Explain, Sergei.
It's a cavern. Deep. Can't see far into it. Yakov wouldn't listen and went down. Lost comms. Tried to follow, but it's too dark.
Fucking idiot, Yakov. How did he even pass? Sergei, stay where you are. Maxim, Stella, bring him a lamp. Go find that idiot. Damian, Natia, stay with me.
There's a hint of panic in Sergei's voice. I could tell what cavern he found. I knew exactly what he was referring to. The shrine. I could agree with Luchak's ire. Even though he couldn't have known, Yakov was clearly not the brightest. Maxim and Stella pack up a few supplies before heading out. Damian gives the camera to Stella, and the two head out. The trek to Sergei felt ever familiar, the unmarked ground being filled with footsteps that would be joined by a rover's slow riding across the ground. When Sergei came into view, he waved at Maxim as the cavern was visible behind him. It confirmed my fears. It was definitely the same cavern Lander and Journey had encountered.
Hey, we got the lamp. Have you heard from Yakov?
Maxim asked, setting down the lamp and looking into the hole in the surface.
Nothing, man. Not even static. Idiot's probably lost by now. I told him not to go in. At least I kept the flag.
I'll stay here. Don't get lost now and keep in touch with me or Luchok.
Maxim moved to the flag, standing tall next to it as it flapped in the wind.
Stella with me then? Nice.
Sergei chuckled and glanced at Stella, who scoffed.
In your dreams, Sergei.
Stella shot him down.
Luchok, we're at the crevice. Trench is about 3 meters in diameter. Maxim will stay up here while Sergei and I look for Yakov. That good, Commander?
Permission granted. Go ahead, you two. Don't get lost.
Luchok replied. With that, Sergei and Stella made their way into the cavern. Maxim held the light, leading the way while Stella followed behind him. Occasionally, she'd look down and pick up a rock or some dirt. It wasn't until she encountered a 6-sided obsidian prism that she spoke again.
Come look at this.
Sergei turned around and walked over to her, glancing down at the rock she held in her palm.
What the hell is that?
Don't know. Maxim, Luchok, can you hear us?
Stella called in, but there was no reply. Judging by the terrain, they were almost at the shrine.
Damn, no signal, too far down. Heard from Yakov yet?
No, I haven't heard anything from him.
Sergei was interrupted by an ear-piercing shriek. When I first watched it, I fell back from my chair in shock. It was an incredibly loud, inhuman scream that was tinged with pain and fear. Sergei and Stella rushed down the halls to the source when Yakov's voice finally came in. He was screaming incoherently, violently swearing and gasping for breath before the two reached him at the shrine. Dead on the floor with yellow blood was a smaller Martian, whose head was bashed in with a rock held by Yakov.
What the fuck?
Sergei didn't even have time to ask questions before 3 more poked their heads into the chamber, rage visible in their eyes from the sight of one of their dead. The next few minutes were a blur. Stella made a break back the way she came while Sergei stayed to try and defend Yakov. But as the tapes from the future showed, their fight wouldn't matter. Frantic panting started to fill the audio, drowning out the sounds of screams and fighting from the shrine. Miraculously, Stella got close enough to regain communication with Maxim, who picked up on her horrified gasping.
What the hell is going on down there? We lost you 6 minutes ago. What?
Get back to the fucking shuttle, Maxim.
Calm down, Stella. I can't...
There's something down here, now fucking move, Maxim.
Something? You mean...
Yes, Maxim, now hurry. They're right behind me.
Stella looked back to see 2 Martians running across the cavern's floors on all 4s, chasing her with a maddening bloodlust. A light at the end of the tunnel gave way to the surface, where Stella nearly collapsed into Maxim's arms. Their reunion was short-lived thanks to the creatures behind, which grabbed onto Stella and began dragging her back into the cave. She screamed in horror, kicking and fighting all she could, but the monsters had the upper hand. They tore into her spacesuit, trying to reach the skin beneath. I'll give credit to the Soviets. These suits weren't cheap, and it showed. The creatures that I had seen tear metal into shreds couldn't make a dent in the suit. Maxim must have realized things were lost when even more emerged from the cave, as he started running back towards the shuttle while the Martians gave up on trying to get to Stella's body, simply opting to drag her back into the darkness as she screamed and begged for help. The feed cuts out then and there. I thought that was it, but when I went to stop the footage, I noticed how long it was. It was days long, and giving a cursory glance showed that most of it was black empty feed. That is, until the end of the 5th day, when the footage finally returns. Stella is sitting in some sort of prison chamber, holding the camera in her hands, pointing it towards her face. She's still wearing the tattered and dirty remains of her spacesuit as she wept softly. After a few seconds, she spoke.
This is Stella Zelina, aged 27, part of the USSR's Martian Expanse program. I don't know if Command is receiving this, likely not. The transmitter should still be online back at the shuttle if the shuttle is intact, that is. I don't know if it is or not. I'm reporting 1 confirmed fatality, Natia Litova. May she rest in peace as an honor to her country. Those things, they killed her. Took her to some sort of table, strapped her down and tore out her guts. Made us watch as their fucked-up crowd cheered them on. Yakov is badly injured. They're letting us patch him up. I don't know why. I don't know why they're keeping us alive. There's air down here. It's impossible and it shouldn't be the case, but there's breathable air down here. I saw a couple of plants and farms on my way in. I can hear them speak sometimes at what I assume must be night. I can't tell down here, and it's hard. Their voices are a bit scratchy and range from mellow to violent. I think there's some now. Hold on.
Stella pauses, holding the camera close to the wall. I can vaguely make out the sounds of alien chatter. Their voices seemed wrong, somehow. I don't know how to put it, but it made me feel very uneasy. It's difficult to describe. The best way to put the sound is a mixture between some sort of reptilian croaking and an Asian dialect.
Sorry, I'm distracted now. I just want to go home, you know? Never thought I'd get accepted for this program, and when I first got on the ship, I thought this would be something amazing, and we did land here, we did. We've made it to Mars. I don't think the inhabitants are happy about it. I don't know if it's because Yakov killed one. He says it attacked him first. Another thing I've noticed is that every day they take one of their own down into that first room we found, and after a few minutes they come back without them, coated in blood. Sergei says it's some sort of sacrificial ritual. They dragged the last one kicking and screaming. I don't know why they're killing their own and not us, but...
Stella is interrupted by off-camera shuffling, which prompts her to turn the camera towards the noise, showing Damien, still in his spacesuit but awake. Beside him is Luchok, who is tending to Yakov.
You finally got that thing working? They need to send men up here and fucking trash the place. Shoot every single one of those fucking lizards. Those bastards deserve it after what they did to...
Damien himself is interrupted when Luchok interjects.
Don't be a fucking idiot, Damien. You think anyone's gonna help?
Luchok scoffs, shaking his head. It reminds me of the date of this recording, 1989, 31 years ago. He was right. Nobody would save them. Hell, we knew about them since 1999, and we didn't even bother to help. We just covered it up and moved on. Damien grumbles and walks towards Stella, taking a seat right next to her. He offers to hold the camera wordlessly, and she obliges, handing it over to him.
They took Sergei and Maxim for... something. I don't know what. They still haven't found the ship as far as we know. When Sergei explained, we decided to abandon the ship, leading those things off course. God knows that if they found it, they're looking for it. I think they know that it can get them to Earth. Fuck if they find it.
Damien's grim expression as he stared hopelessly into the camera spoke miles. The sudden recognition in his eyes gave way to sorrow. I remembered that we never saw that craft. Movement comes from outside the cell, and Damien aims the camera to watch with him. A group of Martians march towards it, pushing Sergei and Maxim along. Damien stops breathing for a moment, the view of the camera shaking intensely.
Luchok, how long do the ship's transmitters function after touchdown?
Damien asks, his voice dead set on a suicidal idea that I already knew he'd go through with.
About a week or two tops. Why?
Luchok answers, oblivious to Damien's idea. Stella gasps, seemingly putting two and two together.
I'm going to get this camera to the ship and send the feed to command. Then I'm going to activate the launch sequence.
Damien explains his plan. Stella quietly pleads with him not to as the Martians grow closer.
The launch sequence won't function without the coolant tanks. It'll blow itself apart.
I know.
Do you need us to buy you some time?
Luchok is heard getting up as well, and Stella sighs, realizing that there's no use arguing against Damien.
Do whatever you can do. Sergei and Maxim are smart enough to know. I can get back there easily. I'll get this sent out so Command knows what kind of fucked up shit is down here.
Stella and Luchok were in silent agreement. When the Martians opened the cell door, the three of them charged into them, catching all off guard. Damien made a break for it with the camera, as the others did what they could to hold them back. After a short scuffle, Luchok's pained screams echoed throughout the damp, dark corridors before it turned to eerie gurgling, as I could only assume his body was defiled and ripped into endless shreds. Thankfully, Damien didn't turn the camera back to look. He kept going through the caves, reaching the massive area Journey would encounter a decade later, then running into the farming rooms. I knew he'd make it, but the tense sounds of the creatures crawling across the halls right behind him. I don't know how he had the courage to keep running, past a familiar shrine, adorned with a Martian's mangled corpse indicating the recent sacrifice, and into the natural formations of the cave until the distant beams of the sun were shining through the crack in the surface. The flag of the USSR was still firmly attached to its flagpole. Damien ripped it from the ground and finally glanced behind him with the camera. He swung the pole with all of his strength as one of the Martians came to the surface, knocking them back into the others in a pile. Taking the advantage while they were down, he speared the pole through all 5 of them, slicing into their scaled flesh and sending their blood flying with an audible yell. Victorious, Damien continued his sprint towards the craft, having bought himself time. In the distance, it came into view, Damien clutching the camera tightly in his hand. I could hear more scampering behind him. They were back on track. He quickly undid the seal, pulling the hatch and climbing inside. Before he could close it, one of the Martians dived into the opening, becoming trapped with him inside. The noises outside stopped. It was clear they didn't want to risk destroying the spacecraft. Damien swung at the monster inside of the craft, knocking them to the ground. He took a moment to show the view outside from the interior of the shuttle, before speaking one last time.
If this thing's still on, stay the fuck away from here. You got that?
The feed finally ends as Damien presumably hooked up the camera to send back all of the footage it had obtained. The rest of the Soviets' records show that the craft stopped sending any signals 8 minutes later, indicating its destruction in the failed takeoff. The Soviets were dumbfounded and horrified. All of their remaining reports indicate the absolute chaos they devolved into after. Hell, it may have even contributed to the collapse of the Union for all I know. Thoughts of many people believing it may be best to destroy nations to hide the truth. Whatever is the case, Russia isn't even aware of this. Everyone assigned around that time either went into isolation, assumed new identities, or took their lives. After I saw it, after I took it all in, I don't know what to do anymore. The Martians are not only aware of us, they almost definitely were attempting to rebuild that spacecraft. God knows what the hell they'd do if they got here. Even if we have the upper hand, who knows how many lives would be lost. Other than that, there was nothing more I could find from the Soviets. I tried looking for information from other space agencies, and there's absolutely nothing I could find. That was until I looked back at us, back at NASA. I mentioned earlier that it'd be impossible to just glass or nuke the planet. I stand by that statement. You see, I found out why NASA kept sending rovers to Mars. Why we keep sending things up to that planet that those creatures could just use against us. We can't launch a nuke and hope it kills them. It's too precise of a projection. What we can do is send something that they wouldn't think twice about. Something that they'd unknowingly take into the heart of their people. A Trojan horse. Remember back when I first decided to tell you all about this? The rover Curiosity. She's still active. The Martians took her back into their cave, and she's still sending feeds. They took it to the cave, the one that all had found before and fallen victim to. They want to show us another sacrifice. They want to show Curiosity her first and only blood show before they destroy her. The Martians are preparing for it. They should perform their ritual sometime next week. And Curiosity is ready. Ready to do what she was always destined to do. I can only hope she pulls this off. So that's how it is. You'd expect something huge to come from our discovery. The second revolution of astronomical science was said to take hold when we met life from the stars. We met it so close to home, and this is how it ends. Not with greeting or apology, but massacre. I still debate with myself if there was something else we could have done. Sometimes I wonder, had Yakov not killed that Martian, would we be in this situation? Or were these hostilities inevitable? Could this have ended with 2 races uniting against the sky? I'll never know. Nobody will ever know. It's too late to turn back. Not just for me, but for us. Whether or not we did the right thing is another question entirely. I'm afraid this will be my last post on this topic, so let me get everything out of the way before I start. Over the past month, I found myself involved in the discovery of life on Mars and the horrid implications of their hostility. I still don't understand the most of it. I think that's for future generations to figure out. We never deciphered any of their writing, nor did we bother to study their language. The Martians' culture is something that another person will get to understand. Their cycle of daily slaughter, the strange kindness displayed by the few. We'll never realize what any of it means. And it's our fault. I don't know if we did the right thing. That's for you to decide. First, a short recap. I'm a scientist working at NASA, and I've gotten to witness our several meetings with the enigmatic reptilians known as Martians. These creatures were responsible for the destruction of Spirit and Opportunity, 2 rovers we launched in 2004. I later found out that we'd seen them before, once with a lander, and the second time with a secret rover I named Journey. Journey's footage showed proof that the Soviets had not only landed on Mars, but apparently had landed people on the planet. My dive into that gave me a full video of most events that transpired. More worryingly, it proved a theory I had been trying to ignore. The Martians were trying to get to Earth. After I posted that, I discovered that one of our rovers, Curiosity, had been captured by the creatures, and that she may just hold the key to humanity's safety. Now, on to what's transpired since. The rover Curiosity was equipped with a hidden compartment, one that not even her engineers knew of. Inside were several toxins and explosives, all extremely powerful and tiny in scale. You see, in the event she was taken, we had a plan. By our luck, the Martians scooped her up and took her to their hive, exactly as we had planned for. Curiosity was left inside of the shrine room while the creatures awaited their ceremony, and that's when we had to decide. Curiosity was capable of wiping them out. The toxins would rapidly destroy cellular structures and all dissolve easily into water. The explosives would be laid out at strategic locations, making the hive susceptible to a remote detonation intended to ensure their fates. 25 people got to decide the fate of an intelligent species. I wasn't among them, and I don't envy any of the men and women who had to make that choice. The vote was close, 14 to 11 against. In the end, however, they had our answer. We were to proceed with the plan. Curiosity slowly made her way down the farming sector of the hive, occasionally piercing a fruit with a lethal poison at our discretion. The Martians that did notice her paid no mind, even when she entered the central hub. From there, she took to every source of water she could find, dousing them with the toxin. One by one, each pool of water was laced with the lethal poison. When ingested, it was intended to target many systems of the body, more than necessary in case their biology is extremely different, and rapidly shut them down as painlessly as it could. In some other spots, she'd lay down one of the microscopic explosives. One of the creatures took notice of the poisoning, almost threatening to destroy the rover. Fortunately, they walked to the pond and scooped up the water with their hands, 4 scaly fingers ending in sharp daggers. Cusping the liquid, they slid it into their throat and swallowed. The result was unexpected. After mere seconds, the Martians' eyes expressed myriads of pain as the poison began its work. They fell over, clutching their head, shivering and spasming before their jaw unhinged in a horrifically silent scream of unbridled suffering. They kicked the pond and smashed into the floor, the jagged movements reminiscent of a stroke victim. Curiosity simply continued on, emotionless to the torture having befallen the creature. Most of the crew was emotionless too. Turning the camera back for one last glance, the Martian, having gathered the attention of others with their screaming, was bashing their skull against the rock walls, staining it with blood in a desperate bid to stop the pain. Finally, they fell to their knees and collapsed, dead on the cavern floor. We had worried the toxins wouldn't work. Turns out they worked too well. Regardless, she had a mission to do. We had a mission to do. Carrying on through tunnel after tunnel, she encountered resistance when what I assume is one of their priests arrived, fury in his stare. He lunged at the rover, ready to strike her down. We couldn't react in time due to the delay, but we didn't have to. Luck remained on our side. The priest pricked himself on the grasp of Curiosity, allowing the poison to enter his body. We didn't stay to watch this time. Apparently that was enough to send the majority of Martians into submissive fear of Curiosity. None dared get close to her, clearing her path through the tunnels. Going deeper, she found a group of the creatures, huddled around a large blossoming flower. It resembled a rose, except it was tinted a strange hue of pink, tinted slightly gray. A small Martian, presumably a child, was sat atop. The crowd was too entranced to notice as Curiosity entered the next room. This room was simply breathtaking. It opened up to a massive expanse reaching hundreds of meters in all directions. Most of the room was an underground lake, water reflecting the glittering crystals that lined the ceiling, themselves shining the reflection of Curiosity's gaze back down into the water. There was no telling how deep the lake went. We couldn't risk getting her close enough to see. The best guess we have is a couple hundred meters of clear and pristinely clean water stretching down into the crust of Mars. It was most definitely their primary water source, and a decision was made to dump most of the remaining toxins into this lake, keeping a few on hand just in case. With that, Curiosity turned back through the flower room and into the central hub, where she was noticed by Leader. I knew it was him. I just knew it. Even from his faraway eyes, I could tell who it was. I think the rest of us did too. Leader stormed towards the rover in fury, lifting her up and carrying her with his strength. Behind him, many more Martians began to follow him obediently. It was time for their ritual. The grand scale of the water room was outdone by the temple, which had been substantially increased in size and grandeur since the late 90s. Hundreds to thousands of chairs were positioned across the delicate pavement, each carved to fit the stature of the Martians. Engraved into each obsidian seat were symbols much like the ones written on the prisms seen before. As Leader made his way to the centerpiece, the Martians filtered in through the numerous entryways, all taking their place on the finely crafted thrones. Decorating the center shrine were distinct, human bones, all of them seared into unrecognizable patterns of glory, celebrating their deaths. Curiosity was stationed on top of a large slab to prevent her escape as Leader awaited the sacrifices. From the main entrance emerged a group of Martians wearing cloaks of tough fabric, likely salvaged from the suits brought by the Soviets. The group forced along 5 blindfolded individuals, only 2 of whom were continuing to put up any resistance. The other 3 marched in seeming reluctance, although knowledgeable of the inevitability of their fates. They reached the expanded altar, and one by one the tributes were forced onto the stone and had their arms and legs spread out to the sides and held down with a makeshift chain. Curiosity zoomed in on the preparation, revealing the intricacies of the ritual being performed. The priests made swift yet smooth motions, clearly accustomed to the movements involved with this process. We contemplated detonating the explosives while they worked, but decided to wait instead, keeping the small devices ready to activate at a moment's notice. This would be the last thing we'd ever see from the Martians, so I suppose we didn't want to waste it. With the tributes prepared, Leader picked up one of the larger bones resting against the altar. He showed it to the crowd to their silent yet deafening glee, then held it in front of Curiosity's camera. He grasped it tightly, glaring into the lens with burning, unending hatred, before swiftly turning around and slamming the bone into the skull of the leftmost sacrifice, cracking apart the scales to reveal the squishy interior caked with blood. Leader continued to slam the blunt end into the now dead Martian's head, flattening it and splattering himself in blood with each blow. This went on for minutes, the crowd in the distance visibly cheering him on. As before, I could make out a solitary few individuals who seemed as disgusted with the brutality as I was. Finally, Leader finished the sacrifice, resting the bone on top of the deceased's neck. He reached down to retrieve a second bone and moved to the rightmost victim, one of the strugglers. Leader once again displayed the weapon to the camera, ensuring Curiosity had a long, intense gaze with the club. With one slash, he tore into the next target's chest, ripping open a sizable hole in the center of their abdomen. The tribute screamed and thrashed against the chains to no use as Leader struck the bone into the gaping wound and stirred it like one would prepare a soup. This was the point most of us looked away. Not me. I kept my focus on what was unfolding, a reminder to myself that we did what we had to. If they were willing to employ such torture against their own, then humans, who they hated so vehemently, they had to be stopped. Next to go was the victim in the middle. While we debated on activating the explosives and saving us the horror of witnessing the ritual, Leader started what I assume is some sort of recital or prayer. This continued for a while, the audience seen mimicking his movements and speech. We had seen enough, I heard being argued. I said nothing as the middle victim was promptly eviscerated by Leader's bladed claws. By the time he had finished, it was more than enough for the rest of us. I watched somberly as Curiosity was instructed to detonate the explosives. During the 6-minute delay, Leader gestured to the remaining sacrifices, and then to Curiosity, as if to taunt her. He made no moves, simply waiting for our response. From what I can tell, it seemed that he wanted us to decide who dies next, something we never did. Time marched on, Leader growing ever more impatient, unaware of what was to come. And then, just like that, the feed cut to white as the explosives did their work, traversing throughout the caverns as they had been placed to do. Curiosity's signal was lost as she presumably perished in the detonation. And really, that was it. Just like that, it was all over. It felt anticlimactic because it was. I can't describe the emptiness that filled me after the fact. I thought we'd see something new from them before their end. Most of all, it was the loss of curiosity that struck me. It wasn't like the other rovers, who had died in their discoveries. Curiosity may have saved the world. She did what we had to, and she'd be lost because of it. Nobody would know the truth of her demise, relegated to a system failure that never happened. The world would remain blind to her sacrifice. That's what hit me hardest. After that, there wasn't much left to do. Files were expunged, records redacted or deleted outright. Video files from the past burned and left as ash. Payments made to keep people quiet. Many resignations along with them, myself included. I couldn't keep working and the stars knowing all of this, then being expected to focus on the mundane. I just can't do that, as I'm sure you no doubt understand. I kept in contact with colleagues, but that was it for me. I patiently awaited the announcement of Curiosity's failure. It never happened, though. Last night, I received a call from a close friend who was still working at NASA. It was about Curiosity. Just when they had prepared a cover story, she responded to a status request. By some impossible miracle, Curiosity had survived, almost entirely intact. She was in a dark, unknown cavern, and with nothing else to do, she was sent onward down the cold, lifeless path, coming into view of a light. It was an exit to the cave, leading to the surface, beams of the sun gleaming down onto her metal skin. I was relieved beyond belief to hear her survival. We don't know how it happened, nor how she ended up where she did, but nobody cared about that. Curiosity was alive and well, and could continue to explore safely without fear. In celebration, she took a few photos of the surrounding landscape, the desert red of Mars that I have come to fear and love at the same time. Dunes and hills scattered around, slight imperfections in the crust. After all that had happened, it was beautiful. One of the photos she took was of the cavern behind her, a wide shot that appeared as a still frame from a carefully directed film. Contrasting the bright lights of the surface was the dark abyss of the cavern. I couldn't take my eyes off of this image. It astounded me in a way with the perspective of triumph it held, as Curiosity proudly stood alive against all odds. There's only one thing that soured this moment. It was the dozens of crimson dots staring from the darkness.